Hi. I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. I didn't like Endgame, and I'm sorry, please don't stop watching. We're good. And whilst we're all friends here, I'm also gonna say I didn't much like Infinity War either. If we're cutting hairs, I would say that my favourite Marvel Avengers movie is probably Age of Ultron, followed by Civil War. If Civil War doesn't count as an Avengers movie, we're not getting into that argument. Yes. Why Age of Ultron? Why is the least liked Avengers movie my favourite movie? About to explain. Whilst Age of Ultron had me engaged the whole way through, Endgame had my interest wavering at points. And whilst Endgame relied on spectacle and fan service, Ultron focused on character development and heart. But most importantly, whilst Ultron made me think about the ethics of preventative measures, intervention, and the role of the West in policing the world. Throughout the entire SFX extravaganza, all I could think of was, what's the point of all this? I'm CJ Simon, and this is the Mindless Follow YouTube channel, where we're going to be asking the question, are movies political? So, are movies political? Yes. It's pretty obvious I'm going to land on the answer that yes, they are political. Still, it's the journey that's more important. So like any movie that finishes where it starts or starts where it ends,
getting there is half the fun.
So, I have to first acknowledge the case against the politicization of movies, i.e., speak for those who would argue that movies are not political vehicles. In the early 20th century, Sam Goldwyn, a founding father of modern-day cinema, once chairman of the board of Paramount in the 1910s and founder of Goldwyn Pictures, now known as Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, that's the one with the lion. Oh, that's a bad one. For context, and to establish just how important Sam Goldwyn was in the industry, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer is one of the oldest production companies. It's known for producing hit franchises like the latter Rocky movies, like the James Bond films, along with hit singles like Spaceballs, Clash of the Titans, and Rain Man. They were monoliths in the industry until eventually they were bought by Sony and became their satellite, and then they were bought by 20th Century Fox and became their bitch, until Fox was bought by... Anyway, I'm going round in circles. Sam Goldwyn, one of the founding members of modern-day cinema, once said in regards to the politicization of movies, if you have a message, go to Western Union. Meaning, we don't want movies with messages. Looking at some of Goldwyn's releases when he was essential influence over movies being made by his production company, that seems pretty true. There's nothing really political about Polly of the Circus, Tilly the Scrub Lady, or Phase, especially when you compare them to the message-ridden literature of the time. Thinking back, Kafka's Metamorphosis and the Trial, D.H. Lawrence's The Rainbow, Joseph Conrad's The Shadow Line. I mean, this was the era of Woolf, Eliot, and Wells. So for Goldwyn, cinema would do what these writers would not. Stay the hell out of Parliament or Capitol Hill, if you're stateside. Another example of the politics, not politics debate comes more recently, when the alt-right sector of American politics called for a boycott of Disney's Rogue One. Great movie, by the way. Now, they did this because Rogue writers Chris Weitz and Tony Gilroy described the Empire as a white supremacist human organisation pitted against a multicultural group led by women. Clearly, that description from the two is just an appalling indictment of interplanetary imperialism. Maybe the American right just understood that at that point in the Star Wars story, if you follow a particular narrative, the Empire were the good guys, right? I mean, they hadn't blown up Alderaan yet. Anyway, when that boycott had been called, Disney chief Bob Iger came out to the movie's defense by calling out the inherent racism, sexism, and fear of progression within this boycott. Just kidding. He simply said, Rogue One is not a political film. Good job, Bob. You see, he rested on the age-old argument started by Goldwyn. If you want a message, go to Western Union. Movies are popcorn flicks, mindless entertainment, brainless blockbusters. They're fairground rides. They're roller coasters filled with action, a couple of laughs, and maybe a love story. Bam! Suddenly you're 2 hours closer to death and 2 hours dumber than you were before. Thank you, Mickey. On the outside, this is true. Where is the politics in any Michael Bay movie? Where is the politics in the greatest Christmas movie ever? Better watch out. Wait, what was that? Die Hard? Die Hard's not a Christmas... Okay, where's the politics in the greatest Christmas movie ever? Die Hard. How is Shaun of the Dead worth the time of any political analyst or MP? Before I can answer that... So what makes something political? To say something is or isn't political without first defining politics would be absurd. When I say politics, what do you think about? First guess, if you're a Brit, is Parliament, Westminster, or Congress if you're American. This is an arena-based understanding of politics. Politics as a place, politics being the offices of lawmakers and politicians. In movie terms, that's, I don't know. Any movie where somebody runs for office? There aren't that many movies, when you think about it, that are based around the location of politics makings. For TV shows, recently that's a bit different. But for movies, for film, there's not much. Well, there are a couple. I would want to say it would include movies like All the President's Men, but under the arena model, politics occurs in a well-defined, formal structure, which doesn't include newspapers. Politics as an arena includes town halls and senates and even court, but wouldn't really include protests on the street. If not as an arena, then we should think about politics as a process. The process of governing, of legislating, of making decisions which affect society. Now, this would include the usual congresses and town halls, but would also look at the sort of processes that affect congresses and town halls. You know, we would look at, well, everything. The Google definition of politics is the activities associated with the governance of a country or area, especially the debate between parties having power. This is just too limiting. It takes the arena-based understanding of politics, which, if you're an activist like me, should be pretty disappointing. I take it back. You can argue that protests are political because it's arguably associated with governance, but rising matters in political discourse might not be political. Sexual harassment, racist abuse, FGM, books, theatre, economic disparity, pay. It ignores politics in the private sphere. That is to say, it ignores politics at home, patriarchy, child rearing, carbon consumption. This is why I quite like to use Leftwich's definition. Politics as consisting of all the activities of conflict, peaceful or not, negotiations and cooperation over the use and distribution of resources within or involving two or more people. Thus, for something to be political, it should pertain to these activities. Something political should be involved in conflict, negotiations, and cooperation in regarding to distribution of resources. Resources being money, food, water, even power. In this case, any attempt to sway public opinion, influence voting, beliefs, and behaviour is political. In fact, any attempt to stick to the status quo, to quote Sharpay, is political because it affects the distribution of resources. The statement that, say, the disparity in pay between female football players and male football players is justified, to say that is just as political a statement as saying that all football players, regardless of their gender, should be paid the same amount. Thus, and I hope you're following me here, a movie is political if it can be seen to present a message which conforms or dissents from the general order of things. If it attempts to change how you feel about the world, or cement it. So, as you can tell, the list of movies that are political might be quite large. I'll return to Age of Ultron. The reason it's political is because it uses the Avengers as stand-ins for the West, and namely America, to ask the question, is Western intervention okay? Western intervention arguably creates more evils than it defeats. Western intervention can destroy the world it's attempting to protect. Western intervention still saves lives. Western intervention can still come from a good place of wanting to save future generations from the scourge of war. The intent? To influence the way people think about war and intervention, change the way voters think about war and intervention. It's an attempt to redistribute the power inside government by influencing the ideas of those outside of government. So are all movies political? I'm not going to be coy about this one either. No, not all movies are political. A lot are. But there are key things to look out for. That's the message. What is the movie saying? To analyse this, I want to look at two movies, Kramer vs. Kramer and Marriage Story. Marriage Story is the 2019 Oscar-nominated and maybe Oscar-winning Noah Baumbach movie with Scarlett Johansson, Adam Driver, and Lena Dunham. It follows how both Johansson and Driver deal with their divorce and how the divorce affects the relationship with their child. And for those who haven't seen it, Kramer vs. Kramer is the 1979 Oscar-winning Robert Benton movie with Meryl Streep, Dustin Hoffman, and Jane Alexander, and it follows how both Streep and Hoffman deal with their divorce and how the divorce affects their relationship with their child. On paper, they are the same movie, made 40 years apart, but when you look underneath and you see what's going on under the hood, you find how the engines are very different. What's the point of Marriage Story? Well, without getting into the mind of Baumbach, to tell a nuanced, emotional story of divorce, exploring how there are two sides to every story, a balanced view of contemporary marriages. The film jumps between the perspectives of Driver and Johansson in order to say, hey, there doesn't have to be a good party or a bad party in a divorce. We say things we don't mean, we do things that are irresponsible, but in the end, there's love. What's the point of Kramer vs. Kramer? To present an alternative understanding of the family unit. It'd take a whole new video to do this argument credit, which we might come to in later months, but this quote from an essay by A. Kimber highlights the point poignantly. Kramer vs. Kramer was indicative of social reality of the 70s and 80s, which saw a dramatic shift in attitudes about parenthood. Although a mother physically births a child, both parents are involved in the conception, nurturing, and raising process. And since that point, there have been a multitude of movies presenting a more nurturing father figure. Pursuit of Happiness, The Road, To All the Boys I've Loved Before, Easy A, Finding Nemo, Kick-Ass, Road to Perdition, Boys in the Hood, Mrs. Doubtfire, Juno, The Bachelors, Ant-Man, Jingle All the Way. Whilst Marriage Story does the same thing as Kramer vs. Kramer, presents a man struggling to be a father, its intent, successful or not, is to generally present divorce overall as a difficult process, not to highlight the role of any particular party. This is generally shown in an attempt to present a balanced struggle faced by Driver and Johansson. However, In Kramer vs. Kramer, Streep is almost wholly absent from the film's first and second act because the movie is about Hoffman. Sure, there were movies which showed a caring and nurturing father made before Kramer vs. Kramer. To Kill a Mockingbird, It's a Wonderful Life, and Jaws coming to mind, but presentations of a present father were mostly absent of pre-1980s media. When they did exist, they tended to be patriarchal figures who never were seen taking up the roles traditionally done by women. Baumbach says as much himself in this section of Marriage Story.
Let's face it, the idea of a good father was only invented like 30 years ago. Before that, fathers were expected to be silent and absent and unreliable and selfish. And we can all say we want them to be different. But on some basic level, we accept them. We love them for their fallibilities.
Now, I believe Marriage Story isn't as balanced as it intends to be, but we can still see the movie's attempt to be messageless. Whilst Kramer vs. Kramer clearly has a message, one vehicle is driven by emotion and love, and the other about a social form of politics. Let's discuss movies like Tilly the Scrub Lady, Phase, and Polly of the Circus. All three perpetuate ideas of women being objects of desire, either because of their beauty or the opportunity for social climbing. They are easily manipulated, naive, often the butt of a joke, and always in need of rescuing. The intent? Cement where women belonged in society at the time, or where people believed they belonged in society at the time. These movies came about at a time during female empowerment. At the end of World War I, the percentage of women employed rose from 23% to 46.7%. But these movies seem to argue that, sure, women can have jobs and may even have their own wealth, but they aren't smart enough to look after themselves. Now, I'm not saying movies have to be political to be good. It's very clear I probably didn't love Marriage Story that much, and I said at the front, I didn't like Endgame. And that is because it didn't have a point. Whilst I prefer movies to have substance, they don't have to have them. I do hope they're driven by some wider purpose, but I think we can all enjoy a bit of mindless fodder. I love the Underworld series. I love the Resident Evil films. Hell, I am super excited to watch Scoob in cinemas. And I know those movies aren't going to be masterpieces. I know movies don't have to be masterpieces driven by some liberal agenda. And so when we argue that movies are or aren't political, that the underlying message of a movie is immoral, or that movies sort of fail to deliver a coherent message, that's not giving a value judgment of good or bad. This channel hopes to interrogate whether movies are political or not, and if not, then why? If not, then where are the politics within the movies? Where is the politics in the production of the movie? We're not overly concerned with how I felt about the Avengers movie. That really isn't important. But I do care a lot about Disney dominating the box office. And I don't want to mislead anyone, as I should make it clear that I do think movies should be political, and I will consistently look at the politics of a movie. In a world where our attention spans are so fickle and short, where Vines and TikToks and hot takes dominate pop culture, there is a privilege and power held by movies at grabbing somebody's attention for 2 hours. And that privilege should be used to make a difference if it can. And so I implore anybody looking at making movies like I want to take that into consideration, to understand their role. Film producer Dan Schoenenbrunn. Film producer Dan Schuburn once wrote that our job is to educate, our job is to provoke, our job is to shock, our job is to challenge, our job is to inspire, our job is to expand, our job is to use entertainment as a weapon. And in any of the movies I make, that will be my aim. So are movies political? Yes. And whilst I think they should be, not all of them are. And that's okay. Subconsciously, they may be. There may be story choices and decisions made by producers that can be analysed as an example of politics in movies. These will be explored across a wide variety of content, but mostly video essays, by Mindless Folly Productions. So if you enjoyed this episode, then stay tuned for more analysis of movies over the course of this channel's existence. I'm CJ Simon, and this has been Mindless Folly Productions.